All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It's Greg from California. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. I've been excited to talk to you. So, I know you got tons of experiences to share with us tonight. So, why don't we just get into the first one? I think it's a UFO story that I've been anxious to hear. So, why don't you just take us back to where you were, what you were doing, and what happened?
Okay. It was probably around 1982. A friend and I were sitting in my pickup truck by a little local park in my track of homes, just munching on some McDonald's or something. Pretty sure we were probably discussing our upcoming trip to Florida. We're like 18, 19 at the time. The parents don't want you to do it, so we're pretty much planning it on our own. And as soon as everything's paid for and you can't get refunds, we're gonna spring it on the families and say see ya. uh so we're just kind of staring out, and I see these three lights show up in the sky, like due west. And I've recently looked at my map to remind myself what's out that way, and it's pretty much ocean. I live, depending on which road you take, in one direction about 3 miles from the beach, and another direction about 5 miles, just the way the coastline goes. And I mean, there's one military base semi close, the Los Alamitos joint base, which it wasn't a joint base at the time. There's a military port at that time. The Long Beach shipyard was still there. So there's military stuff out there. But so I see these like three white lights, and I can tell they're not stars. They just got a different look to them. They're not twinkling. And they're, let's say, at a 45-degree angle, and they're spread apart. And one in the middle disappears. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then he comes back. Then one disappears, and then they change positions, almost like the edge of a square, then back to the 45. And I'm just munching on my fries, just looking, and we're kind of, talking, but not about this. And then finally, I think it was my buddy says, "Did you see that?" I'm like, "Yeah, you saw that too?" And he says, This is weird. We couldn't figure out why these lights are disappearing, coming back, staying very straight, very uh, with geometry. It's just solid edges, it seemed like, but it was always just three lights or disappeared to two. Not sure if it ever got down to one. So we had this bright idea of going back to my house, which was like a half a block and a track away, and get my telescope and try to look out my second story window. And we get up there and trees are totally blocking us. Oh, crap. Didn't think about that. Ran back to the park, and then the lights were gone. And I'm not sure if it was me or my buddies. We called somebody trying to figure out, what we saw up there. And they're like, "Oh, it's military. They do this as precision flying." And I'm like, "I don't know." And then years later, not about 3 years later, I went in the Air Force, and I've seen a lot of flying. I I just don't see it. It's just weird. I'm not saying it was aliens. All I'm saying, it fits the UFO, definition of, I saw something that's flying, can't identify it. Not sure if it was anything beyond that, but it just didn't feel like military. And not that long ago, I was wearing my I Want to Believe X-Files type t-shirt and standing in line at a restaurant. And some guy says, "Oh, you believe?" I'm like, I want to. I'm not, I've seen one thing. I'm not really sure what it was. And he says, I explained it to him. He says, "That's the classic UFO experience. A lot of people have that same experience." All right. I mean, it's news to me, but then I watch a lot of the UFO shows, the Sasquatch show, you name it, it's paranormal. I'm intrigued by it. Not sure if everything I believe, but I'm intrigued and I want to know more. And I'd like to find out, if some of this stuff I've grown up with is true or not. Because I mean, I watched the Zapruder film, or not, wrong conspiracy there. The Bigfoot one. I can't remember now the name of that guy.
The Patterson Gimlin film?
Thank you, the Patterson film. Yeah, I mean, there were all kinds of films coming out in the 70s when I was young, about UFOs, and you had Leonard Nimoy with In Search Of, all that stuff. So I was always fascinated by it, and kind of went out looking at times for this kind of stuff. And I don't always experience things I want to. I kind of, you would say, I've opened myself up to, please let me see something. Maybe that's a bad thing to do, but so that's my UFO experience. It's not much, but it's the only one I got.
And it's very typical, right? I've had a UFO experience myself, and I'm not going to go into it on the show. I've told my story many times on other shows and my two shows, the Sasquatch Odyssey and the Paranormal Odyssey. So I won't bore my audience with that. They've heard it ad nauseum at this point. But it's very typical, right? I saw something that was a little more definitive than just some lights in the sky, and I'm always very careful to say it was a UFO. It was an unidentified flying object. I don't know what it was. I don't know if there was little green or gray men that were flying this thing, but in the end, it was something that I can't explain, and it's driven me even to this very moment to continue to search for answers into what these things are. I just posted a show this morning. It was a little over an hour long. For It was David from the UK that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, and he had these amazing experiences that he told me about with this tic tac craft and these entities that he was communicating with telepathically. And every time I put out a show like that, it's always this sort of this caveat in the beginning of, hey, it's kind of like take what you want and leave the rest when it comes to
Hmm.
my show, because I don't like to have people on that I don't believe have had some sort of an experience that they believe they've had. Right now,
Yes.
he's
Y-
telling me these stories, and he's even understanding, and he even says in the interview how fantastical and unbelievable these stories are. And he realizes that people are going to give him shit about it because it sounds it's so far fetched and it's so far out there. He realizes, but he's like, look, dude, this is my experience. This is what I have. Take it or leave it. So I'm always curious when people have those kind of encounters and experiences, very much like yours. How many people out there have experienced the same thing you have? I've seen things that, since my encounter at 16 with this UFO, this unidentified flying object, I've seen things that I can't explain in the night sky. You know, just a couple of months ago and a couple of years back, and even 4 or 5 years ago, I've seen things that just defy explanation to me,
Hmm,
but I still don't know what they are.
interesting. Yeah, we don't have out here. There's a lot of uh, light pollution. So when things stand out in the sky, you kind of take a look because you see, the big stars, the moon, and stuff like that. But when you see three kind of in a geometrical shape and disappear, come back, they don't flicker, you kind of take notice.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
everybody always immediately goes to, well, it's some sort of military
Yes.
craft. It's something experimental. That's the narrative, I guess, that everybody. I'm a little bit of a conspiracy theorist at heart as well. When you said the Zapruder film, I was like, oh man, we're taking a left turn here. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've got things to say about that, but not a lot. I'm absorbing a lot from other people and try to break it down. I'm kind of like a guy that calls bullshit a lot. And my cameraman on my travel show, a lot of times he loves a story. The story is sometimes more important than uh, facts, if you will. And I'll catch him sometimes, and I'm like, "Did you even stop to think if that's even plausible? You're passing something on. And I understand someone else told you, but do you ever stop and think maybe passing that on wasn't the greatest thing because it's beyond credible?" Like he was telling me a story about a person who was supposedly a first female Navy, like not the Delta Force, SEAL team. And I'm like, when was this? Because my ears perk up. Ex-military, got a friend that's also in the Navy. And we're like, uh, time frame's totally wrong. That can't be. Well, that's what they told me about her. Okay, stop and think about that for a second. So I try to apply some logic. Sometimes doesn't always work, but uh, I want to believe people. But I've been on some ghost tours that sometimes it's just, my wife and I'll talking about it after, and we're like, come on, how could every one of those pictures she's taken and while we're standing right next to her, they all have an orbit them? It's like statistically impossible, and no one else is getting the orb, but the person leading this tour, sometimes I just want to go, yeah, but the stories were fun.
yeah, and that's what I say on this show and the Sasquatch Odyssey show as well. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me in some cases if every bit of the story is true or if some of it's embellished or some of it has, been added to over the years with memory and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Because it is entertaining, and particularly with the Sasquatch thing, I'm into the research. I'm into trying to prove if these things are real. Kind of the same thing with the UFOs and the alien, entities that may be flying these craft. If it's not experimental aircraft from our government or, something else, then the only explanation in most cases is that it's got to be some kind of alien craft and we may be being visited. But I
I
don't know that for
agree.
sure. I don't
Yeah.
know that for sure,
Yeah.
you know?
A friend of mine's a Mensa level smart, and he's part of a Mensa group. And they're like, we crunched the numbers. It just doesn't work. Yeah, but this is one of the times I go, you crunch the numbers based off of present science, what we know today, which you're right. It seems like it's too long, but we're also basing it about what we know about our physiology, our lifetime. My wife recently was reading some stuff about what scientists and doctors thought at the turn of the century. And now that we're in the 21st century, I've got to remind people it's the 20th century that they were talking about, where they didn't think women could go faster than, and let's say 15 miles an hour on a train because it would mess with their lady parts. But the science really thought this stuff was true. There was a time we thought we were the center of the galaxy or the center of the solar system. We've now over time proven it's not. So right now we may think we know it all, and I do find that some scientists and physicists, they won't even accept certain things. I was talking to a guy named Michael Rugg, who runs the Taurus or Capri Taurus Bigfoot Discovery Museum in Northern California, near Santa Cruz. And he was trying to go to school to be an anthropologist, and he was writing his first paper, and the scientists just wouldn't have it, or his teachers. It's like, God, I thought science was supposed to have an open mind. You keep testing it and testing it, and either till you totally disproved it, or you proved it, or you leave it as a theory. And on some of these subjects, people just don't want to even explore it, which I find interesting. You wonder why. What's in it for them to keep poo-pooing all this stuff?
Yeah, and eventually it goes to some of the conspiracy theories, right? That
Yes.
scientists are in bed with the government, and like you said, they're poo pooing the Sasquatch thing. They're crapping all over the UFO thing and just making everybody seem like crackpots. And it's just not the case. I have talked to so many people that are credible, reputable people that are in law enforcement or in the military or, uh, you know, not that they're any more credible than, the person serving the sandwich down at Subway, but I'm just saying there has to be some level of credibility in some of these areas that these people are in their private lives, and they have no reason at all. There's nothing to gain by coming out and saying I had an experience where I saw an 8-foot ape in the woods, or I saw a UFO craft landed in my field, or I was abducted and taken on board a craft where I was probed by aliens.
Yeah. In fact, I'd say there's far more to lose than there is to gain for those people. And most of those people are trained observers. Like I spent time working for Disney after I was in the Air Force in security. Did that for 10 years with a little overlap when I retrained to go into architecture. And I did a lot of undercover work for shoplifting. So you when people that go those extra miles to be trained in observation, and police force, fire guys, all these people, the military especially, they're trained to look, maybe not for things in the sky, but they're trained to be a little more analytical. And when they are willing to put, their reputation at risk, I think you got to step up and listen, because I'm sorry, I don't think they're making a lot of money by appearing on this science show, that UFO show. There's some stipends in there, but it's no way to make a living.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that if I can't explain something, I just want to explore it. I want to
Hmm.
figure it out. I want to say, hey, if it's not this, then there is a possibility that it's that. And let's go down that road and see where it takes us. But the people who just refuse to say that and they call everybody crackpots and say those people are crazy, you know, even when I listened back and I was editing the show that I put out today with David, I'm listening to these stories and I'm thinking, that just sounds crazy. I mean, it
Hmm.
really does sound so far out there. And then I'm thinking, how, why this guy's telling these stories and I don't even know that he could make it up. Unless he's some sort of an award-winning author to tell these stories that he's just rolling out with. And I'm watching this guy on video. We're on a Zoom call and I'm watching him on video and I'm seeing his body language and I'm like, this dude believes everything he's telling me. He believes it. So I don't know, man. Tell us a little bit about your time at Disney, man. You got to have some stories from milling around at night at Disney World, man.
I do. Yeah. Well, Disneyland here in California. Um, I started, and at the time, it was very rare to get a full time position in those days, and I got lucky. And they're like, "Well, it's on Graveyard." I'm like, "That's okay. I'm working as a night auditor at a hotel at the time, so I'm already used to the hours." So yeah, and I asked 2 or 3 times, "Are you sure this is full time?" uh, so I came on, and what we did at the time was called area patrols, and there was in security maybe 6 or 7 people patrolling the park at night at the time. And there's not many more maintenance and guys cleaning up. There's some crews shifting on and off to, squirt things down, et cetera, maintain rides, but very minimal people. So for me, I thought it was great because I've always, from a young kid, been exposed to Disney. Disney probably went to Disneyland the first time around 1969 or 70. So I experienced it back before a lot of the hype that's happened, in the 90s and 2000s, when it was still really kind of felt like a family that worked there. So what we'd have to do, and you probably are familiar with those Ditalk box, I think they're called. They're a security box. It's got a clock in it. You stick a key and you turn it, and that shows if people audit the tape that's inside. Okay, you were in this particular location at this time, and they had them throughout the park and the backstage areas. And it was a spooky place at night. I mean, there's lights on, but not like it is if you're in the Magic Kingdom at, when guests are there. It's relatively dark. Out here, we have a thing you guys don't have in Florida. You mentioned you've been to Disney World many times. On our train between Tomorrowland and Main Street, the train goes through first a diorama of stuffed animals. I had lost the term there from the real animals. What do we call it? Uh,
I've got my mind is
I'm
blank.
going blank. Yeah, I can't believe I was thinking about this before I came on to make sure I had all my stuff right. But taxidermy, taxidermied animals, and it's supposed to look like the Grand Canyon. And there's special effects and all that. And you're in. Some people call it a tunnel, but you're basically in a building. And then there's a bridge between two of these buildings, and one's going to take you into the primeval world where the dinosaurs are. And before you hit the bridge, there's a block light. It's very bright. So if you're walking in from Tomorrowland, you're walking through there. And some of these areas weren't necessarily in our patrol, but I just had this curiosity. I just had to see it, And you're like trying to put your hand up to block this light, but you're hearing things inside this tunnel. And you're like, your mind starts running wild of what it possibly could be. Well, there's rats and there's feral cats all over the place. Plus you're walking on, big pieces of gravel. You're probably kicking it up. It's probably echoing, but it was a spooky place to walk through. And a lot of places were like that. One night I got a call that the custodian at the Haunted Mansion was spooked out. She was hearing noises. And I thought, okay, that's odd. And I got up there, and she's not a woman. When I walked up there, I thought, this person's frightened. I mean, she looked like she could take care of herself, kind of stocky. If she was on a Harley one day, you'd probably think that's where she fits. I mean, she just had that persona, very sweet, nice person. So I walked through the mansion. I could have taken some shortcuts to the back, but I like walking the track. It's more fun. And I got to the point where you come out, where you're going to see the graveyard. And I did hear some stuff. And then I heard kind of some like scrambling and leaving. I actually think some employees were probably having a little adult fun down there somewhere under the graveyard. And I went and checked it all out, found nothing. And there's all kinds of stories of ghost stories around the park. You've probably seen some online, some videos that don't look right. But I'm telling you, when I got there wasn't a lot of video. And a lot of the video was old. So, you know how things burn in on TV screens. And I think a lot of that is just that kind of thing. But the weirdest story was I was second shift supervisor, or we called it lead, like a foreman on the shift. I got a call about the Walt Disney apartment, which, in frame of reference to people who haven't been to Disneyland, but maybe Disney World, it's above the firehouse on Main Street in Town Square. It was built early on in the process for Disneyland, so Walt could stay there, and then he entertained there, later on. Now they tell this story like it's been happening since day one the park opened, that the light is left on in memory of Walt ever since he died. Well, it's not true. When I was there, it was only on if a family member was using the apartment or a VIP was up there. Otherwise, the light wasn't up there. It was kind of like a do not disturb, if you will. There's only two ways into this apartment. One is a stairway backstage that you have to go to up to the backside of it. The other one is actually more of a, an exit to a rooftop gazebo or deck that's above the area that where the restrooms are next to it and before you get into City Hall. So if you were up in that area, you would have had to climb the back wall through the bushes to get up there. So not a likely entrance. So I called a buddy of mine who I had just talked into transferring over to security from outdoor vending. Excuse me. And I said, hey, you ever been up to Walt's apartment? He's like, no. You want to go? Sure. So we went back to the security office. No one carried that key. I had keys. I could open every door on property except for that one and one wine locker for Club 33, the private club. So we got the key walking across Town Square. Yes, we see the light. Okay, we're going to go check it out. Maybe somebody left it on from day shift. Who knows? Nobody really goes up there. So we walk around to the back and we can still kind of see a light through the back door. Just a single man door with I think it had one light or piece of glass in it. And by the time we got the key, opened it up, go in, the light's off. We checked that other door I just told you about to the patio. It's locked from the inside. We checked all over. The apartment's not very big. It's basically a loft and it's got a bathroom. Played with the switch of the light on, off, on, off. It was in the off position. Can't tell you. I mean, I saw it on, got in there within a minute and a half. No one could have turned it off, locked, because it's like an old big skeleton key. You'd hear it, it'd click. We're just a few steps away. There's no way that thing got turned off by a person, in my opinion, in the amount of time from where I was in the front to I was blocking the exit. And I had a view left and right for hundreds of feet. If someone had come out, somehow made it out, had the skeleton key that was only in my office. Weird. I'm not saying it was a ghost. I'm just saying it was weird and I can't explain it. To this day, no one has come up with a reasonable or even unreasonable explanation. Most of them just sit there dumbfounded. Anybody I tell that's worked in the park at different levels that know how the park operates it or did at the time have no explanation for it. Weird lighting, bad arc or wiring. I doubt it. It doesn't turn a light switch on, so that's just weird.
Yeah, it's one of those things, man, where you have a situation like that there's really there's only one explanation, maybe two. Either, like you said, it was a person that turned this light off, or it was something else. I've been in situations where lights have done weird things, and you just kind of scratch your head and say, well, is that maybe it's just an electrical thing or a flicker or whatever. But if a light's on and then it's off and there's nobody there to cut it on or off, it's either one or the other.
Yeah, and what I kind of prescribe to the idea of some of what strings theory says, and I know Michael Crichton, great author and also a scientist. So when he wrote about things that had science, he'd explain the science in his books. There might be different roads of time going on, and people call it the glitch in the matrix sometimes when they think that, we're just an experiment and someone's watching us. I think of it more as maybe these different parallel timelines that are going on. Same things, you're over here, then that timeline, you're in this timeline. Sometimes they cross, sometimes they overlap. Perhaps we were just in an overlapping time when, Walt Disney or someone else using the apartment turned the light off, and we had this moment of cross streams, if you will, of time. I mean, I don't know. That's the only thing I can kind of reach out and think, other than just a ghost. And then, if you follow all the ghost legends and stories, that's a lot of that's a powerful entity that's got to have a lot of power to manipulate that kind of thing, at least the way I understand it.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the same way, and I've done that with the alien thing. You know, I used to think these things were coming from so far away in other galaxies, and I'm not so convinced now that it's not some sort of an interdimensional thing because
Hmm?
I've had people on the show telling me stories. I even had one a couple of weeks back, and I named it "Glitch in the Matrix," where this guy passed the same person on the highway, this little old lady driving a car like 7 freaking times, and there's no other explanation for that. You know, either this guy, I think I told him on the show, I was like, either you're full of shit, you're crazy, or that really happened. And if it did, I don't have any explanation for how you passed the same little 70-year-old lady, you know, going the same direction like 5 or 6 times. I just don't understand that. So I'm starting to believe and think that it might be something sort of interdimensional. And you know, there's even people I have on the show that talk about the woo part of Bigfoot, and they talk about them being interdimensional beings and being able to time travel and all these things. And you know, I tend to think that Bigfoot, if it does exist, is a flesh and blood creature. But at the same time, you know, you hear some of those stories and you scratch your head and you just, I don't know any other explanation if these people are being honest that would explain that. So it could be something that's interdimensional. I don't know.
Yeah, I had never heard of that interdimensional Bigfoot thing until I was at that Bigfoot Discovery Museum that was we filmed for our travel show. And I kind of was scratching my head when he was telling about this because I always thought of it as this very elusive, flesh and blood creature. And he was telling me there's all kinds of stories of the local I don't necessarily like to call them Native Americans, but the first people that got to this continent. Um, I like to think of them by their tribe name, and I think we discount the people when we just generalize them all together. And I'm not sure what the tribes up in the Central Valley or Santa Cruz area are, but he says they would tell stories of them almost like watchers. They'd be on ridge lines and they would just disappear. Well, you could easily say, in a blink of an eye, a thing could turn and go down the other side of a ridge, but I had never heard that story, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Because recently I'm driving along, listening to local radio, and they're going to talk about species that all the species that have gone extinct. I'm like, great, we're just going to hear this story about how man is horrible and we're killing everything off. But in the same story was how many new species we discovered or rediscovered, which we thought were extinct. So I have no problem thinking Bigfoot is out there and is just extremely elusive because, until you get in a big forest or, away from your city, it's hard to fathom how dense and big some of these areas are that are basically uninhabited. It could be very easy, I think, for the creature to be out there. You know,
Yeah,
just
I'm the
come, I think.
same. Yeah, I'm the same way. And I think the more I've talked to people over the last year or so doing this Bigfoot show, it seems that they're more on sort of the outskirts or just outside of the society in certain areas, you know, like we are here in North Carolina. We can drive 10 minutes and be at Walmart, but yet when you're on our 40-acre property, it feels like you're 500 miles away from anything, which is why we bought it. That's why we want to be here. And at the same time, there's so much land around us that there could be at least one or two Sasquatch, maybe even five. I don't know what it would take, you know, for to sustain something that big and be like a breeding pair or family group or whatever the case may be. But it's certainly possible. You know, there's probably collectively just in the area right around our property, probably 250 acres of nothing but woods.
Mm.
That's a pretty big space. You know, we've
It is, and until I drove across country once, I'd flown over the country, I don't know how many times, but, when you're in the panhandle of Texas for nearly a day driving, you start to get a real sense of how small small we are and how really our cities and stuff, there's just so much open land out there. And I don't think you really appreciate it till you actually get out there. Most people live and never go probably more than a few hundred miles from their house their whole life, and they've never experienced anything else. And it's really amazing when you get out there and see it. Now, have you ever seen an original or remastered Gimli film?
I have not. I've seen some pretty decent, like 4K worked on versions of the film, but I've never really seen anything that was really early on to see the real definition. But I've talked to people that have, you know,
Yeah, there
in
was
the
a.
space.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't remember what show I was watching because a lot of times I'll have something on a TV while I work for myself, doing architecture and my travel show. So and I got tinnitus. So if I don't have some kind of noise going, it's like Baby Driver, that movie. He's got to have something in his ears or some noise going. So I'll have something, rolling on the TV, and it's like listening to a podcast. And it caught my eye. This guy had got permission. I couldn't even tell you what show it was, to view the original film, which I think one of the wives still had, and he remastered it. He basically took his digital SLR and a rig he had to frame by frame reshoot it. And I was amazed on the difference, because most of the stuff we've seen on TV is a copy of a copy of a copy. And I've worked in film for a long time and know what it's like when you start recopying a picture from a picture or a negative from a negative and not going back to the original. There's a lot of degradation that people who now with video don't appreciate how much different it can be. And it kind of changed the way I looked at the film, because I was always kind of like, I don't know. It's hard to imagine. And of course, you always try to put yourself in a situation. I would have held the camera more steady. I would have done this. Well, I don't think till you're in that position and you have to react like that in a situation that could be quite frightening, I guess, if you're finally encountering this creature that you think, or I don't even know if these guys were actually out looking. I don't remember the story behind if they were out looking for it or not. Um, but I would think it would be quite frightening, even if we think they're not, let's say, predators, at least predators of man. You'd think they would kind of act like any other animal who might be cautious, but keep their distance. I don't
It
know.
sounds like you're probably talking about Bill Munns. He did a very in-depth study of the film, and I think he has some of the. It's not obviously the original film, but
Right.
as close as to the original as possible. And he's done tons of work to frame by frame go back and do the filming of the film, and it's produced some really interesting things out of it. Jeff Meldrum and other people have taken a look at it, and there's so many people like Jeff that I've talked to that say, I am convinced that that is real just as much as if I had been standing there next to them when they filmed it. And that's a
Wow.
pretty powerful statement coming from, a physical anthropologist, you know.
Yeah. No, and when you have the men of science looking at it and not just immediately scoffing it off and actually give it a chance to look at it. There's always been the one about, the Tibetan skull cap, and then it was maybe it's the same guy, and analyzed it and realized the hairs have been cut. And something I didn't know, and I'm trusting that this scientist has given us, the correct information. Once your hair is cut, it will always show that it's been cut. It's got a sharp edge now versus a natural edge, because our hair grows from the follicle, not from the ends. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting. That could be a real quick way to, eliminate unknown hair when it appears it's been already cut. No, as far as we know, animals aren't, going to the barber and cutting each other's hair. So it would make sense that that's a really interesting scientific way to almost instantly prove whether or not it's animal. Then from there, then if it's animal, okay, now what is it? You know, uh, and that's what I really appreciated about this guy that's running this museum up in Santa Cruz, was since he had studied to be an anthropologist, he would like go over the different uh, periods of time. And he has a belief, I believe, that we're going to find, because he was very standoffish when we first got there. They had agreed by email, but we had found out by one of his other people in his building that Penn and Teller had been there with their bullshit show. And I guess it didn't go so well, or the final edited version that went on TV, which I've never seen, was not kind. So he was very standoffish. But as the show progressed, and I guess I showed real interest because I do have real interest, and we talked a little science. He started opening up more, and he'd pull out books that he thought were like the best books on certain subjects. He would talk. He believes that, because we talked about, could it be the missing link? I've got a love hate with science. I was brought up, well, not science per se, but the way some science is treated. I was brought up in private schools, Christian schools. So of course we're taught creation and not evolution. And I've been listening to Darwin's book, and sometimes I listen to it and I shake my head. I'm like, I'm trying to put out of my head what I've been taught from creation. But when you throw that kind of a weird theory out there, and that's what's you go with it. Some of it just sounds more far-fetched than just saying there's a creator out there that put all this together. But he believes we're going to find a lot of these different species will be someday recategorized as one. And I've wondered about that too. How can we have so many different ones, and we find one or two skeletons and we create a whole society or a whole history off of, and sometimes even very small pieces of skeletons, So I wonder over time if we will redefine this tree of relatives, if you will.
Yeah, it's very similar with Gigantopithecus, right? They found
Yes.
just a few teeth and I think maybe a partial jawbone, and they've created this entire this being, this entity, this thing that existed, and it was this big, and it ate this, and it went here, and it did that. And I get the science behind that in most cases, but it's like you said, it's sometimes it's a stretch at best to say, yeah, I believe that, because how do you figure that out from one tooth? You can
Yeah.
extrapolate this and use these formulas to figure out size and what they ate and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, I don't know that that's necessarily accurate.
No,
And
because we know there has been over time some, I don't want to call them totally made up, but they've combined certain skulls and jaws that shouldn't have gone together. And maybe out of ignorance, maybe to perpetuate a certain theory, who knows? I do believe, and this, I know people hate it when I say that there is a religion within science, that science is believed to be so pure that it's almost a religion to itself, that they start breaking their own rules of science, which is to verify, to test over and over and over. And we live in a world that's got a lot of theories, not necessarily a lot of laws, especially with experimental physics and stuff like that. It's really given us something to think about. I wish that's why I like Tesla is one of my favorite scientists, because he tested everything. He tried to build it and see if it would work, and there was a way to do it. But some of the stuff that's theoretical, it's so far out there. Sometimes I don't know if I can put my head around it, and maybe we never will. But that's why I think this guy could be out there. I mean, I took some anthropology classes when I first went to college. I was thinking, I'd like to be an archaeologist. Well, I'm thinking Indiana Jones, let's go have some fun. And then you realize the real science behind it. And I was trying to keep up with it. I was, my dad had died when I was very young. So I was trying to work, go to school, all this stuff, and wasn't keeping up. Signed up for some classes, didn't buy the books, would buy them, maybe weeks into the course, and just got way behind. But, they talk about, we found this shard of pottery, and this has told us all of this information. I'm thinking, really? Or is this basically what's happened is we pass on this way of learning? When that instructor, who was an anthropologist, had gone to anthropology school, this is what he had been taught. He'd been taught. And maybe some of it's broad and it does work, but we keep finding new discoveries. I've grown up with them, science saying, well, none of these places in the Bible existed. Now they've found Jericho. They've found, it doesn't say that necessarily I look at the Bible as kind of a, at the very least, if you take out all the miraculous stuff, it's a history of a people. And it might be a very broad stroked history, but we know it, went around with the Israelites, the Jewish people, and they lived in these places. So that very basic concept, it's got a lot of information in it. And now they're finding some of these places. Some of them are in lands that, the governments don't want you to dig. But I find all that stuff fascinating. I don't care if it's the Anasazi or, all the ancient civilizations. I've read the book, The 13th Planet, which I found very enlightening. Of course, my religious friends will tell me it's all heresy and how can you read this stuff? That's bad. And I'm like, well, I was taught to test all of my beliefs against the Bible. So what's wrong with looking into these things? I'm not saying I'm buying into it, but I find it very fascinating. It's very interesting that we may have been, hybrid for workers. I don't know if you're familiar with the 13th Planet, but it's kind of going back to the or is it the Anastasia? It's where they needed. They're here for gold. They want to mine the gold. They found a local population, which isn't very smart. They hybrided them. They made like a worker bee to, mine gold and all that. And the idea of the 13th planet was such huge elliptical orbit that, every so many thousands of years they could actually land or leave, that kind of a thing. I found it interesting because I try to have an open mind.
Yeah, I definitely made some notes here as you were talking, and I've got that on my book list now.
Yeah, there's like say the guy at the Bigfoot Museum gave us all kinds of books. I'm still going back. This one, like the nature of the beast. It's supposedly the first scientific evidence of survival of ape men into modern times. Supposedly a really good book. It's on my list. I haven't got there yet. There's so much stuff to to look at. It's really, I can't put myself into one subject. I find so much of this stuff fascinating that I'm over here a little while, then I'll be over there a little while. And then we've got this like long history of weird, going back to the Disney thing, the kind of the ghost type stuff or unexplainable. I thought my wife was kidding when I first met her and I was going over her house now and then. Everybody talked about their house was haunted. I'm like, yeah, not that I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm like, they're like, this thing shakes all the time. Where my wife had seen this little girl in their front yard. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Well, every place we've lived, and mostly only in California, except when I was in the Air Force, we've had, or somebody in the family has had some kind of experience. I really haven't until maybe in the last 10 years, which was weird. But we lived in this apartment that there was 2 apartments downstairs, 2 apartments upstairs, but they weren't directly above. We were above the garage in the back. The front area was a single story. There was a stair in between the 2 upstairs ones. And we had recently moved from the very back one to the one in front because it was a little bigger. We had 1 cat. My wife said she came home, went upstairs, couldn't find a cat, went out on the balcony, could see our cat in the apartment next door inside. So she thought that's weird. She went and rapped on the door. Nobody answered. And when she came home, I skipped a step. When she came home, when she first looked up the stairs, she said she saw a person go into that other apartment. So she couldn't find a cat. She sees the cat. She goes, raps on the door because she thought she saw someone go in that apartment. Nobody answers. Raps on the, nobody answers. She kept listening. She's like, why is my cat in that apartment? Finally, she heard the doors open and close. So she ran out, knocked on the door real quick. And the lady says, so I just got home, let me put my stuff down. She says, well, my cat's in your apartment. What? How'd that cat get over there? There's no openings. There's no cat doors. We kept her inside. The lady swears she wasn't home all day. How'd that cat get back into that apartment? Again, I'm not saying ghosts, not, could be very easily explainable that ran under someone's feet when you left, you didn't notice it, but weird. But everybody that's come to our house or our previous apartments have all talked about weird little things. And here I want to see this. Show it to me so I can believe. It never happened. But at this house we're in now, we've been here about 25 years. We, remember back in the day when there was only one computer in the house? Not everybody owned one in their rooms. So we had one out in the living room. And I'm be a night owl. I'm not a very good morning person, but I can be up late. And I'd be sitting there, I don't know, doing what, watching TV at a low level. And I'd hear like a keyboard clicking. And I'd hear like, like whispers, but you couldn't quite define them. I'm like, I'd get up and go look at the keyboard. And I finally asked my wife once, have you ever heard? She goes, yeah, I've heard that. That's just weird, you know? And one day I finally had the thing that I thought was very bizarre. My grandmother had lived to be 101, and she was almost 101. She was my dad's mother. Like I said, my dad had died when I was 11. So in her last 10 years, I had been laid off twice in the recession, the 07, 09. So I had a lot of time to spend at her house, help her out. She's like 90. She's still living by herself, not driving, cooking meals, that kind of thing. Spent a lot of time with her. So not long after she died, my daughters kept saying they would smell her perfume, which I thought was kind of weird. This is one of those phenomenons that people talk about, right? They smells. And then I'm sitting with my arm on the edge of the couch one day, and I felt a hand like touch my arm. I looked down. I don't remember seeing a handprint or anything, but I'm like, now that's weird, because I'm the guy that wants to feel that or experience it. And the noises, you can probably play off as something. I don't know what, but something. But the hand touch where I physically felt it and there's nobody else in the room or near me, that I found bizarre. Can't necessarily say what it was, but I do have this belief that there are people around us. And could it be the Matrix thing? Could it be the time shift thing? Possible. For a while, I was a member of a screenwriting group, a meetup group. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that app, but gets people together to do similar things. So this lady came into our group, and I found out later she wasn't really looking to get into screenwriting. She was looking for somebody to make some films or commercials for her. She was and I'm air quoting, psychic. Very nice woman, very sweet, very interesting life stories. And she does readings and all that kind of stuff. So I made a promotional video for her. I'm like, sure, I'll do that for you. And she, in her belief, she'll tell you that, yes, certain people are around you. And I'm kind of like, well, do they follow us into the bathroom? It's like, that would be kind of creepy. It's just the way my mind goes. I have to think of that. And she'll talk about, sometimes they'll stick around with you for a little while. They want to make sure you're fine before they move on to wherever they're going, or you get the ones that are just stuck. So I never got into the psychic thing and the predictions and things of that nature. But, again, I don't know. This was prevalent in the olden times, if you will. I've got a friend of mine who works in Hollywood who doesn't want most of the people to know where he went to high school. It was kind of an evangelical high school. And a lot of his background's Greek Orthodox anyway. So he'll just, and Hollywood's fine with, Lutherans, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Jewish folks. But for some reason, if you're just plain old Christian or evangelical, they think you're is the crazy right, and we'll talk about how, it seems like all the writings of the old days, there's all kinds of weird magical stuff. Is it true? Why did the magic stop? Why, or is it still here, but modern science and modern people want to discount it? So maybe could that be some of what we're dealing with? But the family has had weird things, and other people, not just the family, have come into like my in-laws' house, my house, and had these kind of weird experiences. Not a lot, not all the time, but enough to make you scratch your head and go, what the heck is going on? And like I said, I think I said, well, before we came on, when we travel, if we go like into Philadelphia, we'll take a ghost tour if there's one. We did one in Tombstone, and that's the one we thought was a racket, because the lady leading it, every time she took a picture, there was an orb in it. Nobody else was getting the orb. And then this one guy was practically passed out. He's like, I'm feeling all this. And it just seemed so made up, but the Queen Mary is very close to us. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history of the Queen Mary or know what the Queen Mary, the ship is, the Gray Ghost from World War II and fastest ocean liner in their day, that kind of thing. They have ghosts too. It's supposed to be really haunted. It shows up in, Ghost Adventures, Ghost Guy, whatever the ghost show is, it's been on it. So we've been to a few things, and I actually finally got something on a recording that I thought was weird. And have you went out and done recordings? I don't know, like a blind recording where you just let it run and you might hope to get something.
I've never done that. I've done an active one investigation. I've talked about it on the show before, where I did catch an EVP at a house that my sister was living in that
Huh?
she claimed was haunted. And I went in, and it's kind of a long, boring story. The only thing that really happened was nothing was happening, so I started provoking, right? I've
Mm,
watched enough ghost shows to know
I've
that,
done that.
well,
Yeah.
if nothing's happening, I'm just going to start pissing this thing off. So I did, and I start walking down this dark hallway towards the bedroom where my nephew, who was like 6 or 7 at the time, was having these experiences where this thing was scaring him. And I'm like, you're scaring my nephew. I'm not scared of you. I'm a grown ass man. You don't scare me. And I go back on my iPhone and I play back the recording, and I'm like, you don't scare me. I'm not scared of you. And I hear, you should be.
Ooh,
And
now
it
that's yeah.
freaked me out. But no, I've never outside of that, I've never caught anything before, during, or after. So
Yeah, see, I'm not gonna be one. There's so many people that claim they get this stuff all the time, right? And this on this one, I'm a bit skeptical, but on more than one occasion, we've went. I've got a whole line of Zoom products, but my most current one is what is this thing? It's actually happens to sit here at my desk, an H6, and I've got my DSLR. I've gone in with my video cameras in this one particular time. Oh, but in the general picture, what I say, I've got hours of this stuff. But to find stuff, you got to be willing to sit for hours and re-listen to, all this stuff, which can be quite boring to do. So on the last one we did before the pandemic, I thought, well, I'll listen to it. And the guy's got the voice recorder. He's got this nice JBL speaker that changes colors, and I'm in the back. I'm at this point, there's a lot of, if you will, true believers that are just, I mean, they're so excited. They're sure they're going to get something. And I've done it so many times. I'm like, yeah, it's maybe one day, So I'm sitting in the back with my recorder, just letting it run. So I played it, listened to it while I was working. And I heard something that sounded like a response to whatever the question was. And so I kept in touch with the guy. I'm a great staying in touch with guy, or oh, not get lost my words. Had COVID. I don't know if it's affected my brain or not, but I try to stay in touch with people I meet at my conventions or things like that. And I sent him a piece of the clip. I said, I'm not going to tell you what I heard. I just want you to blindly listen to this, and you tell me what you think. And he was intrigued. He sent it to more people, and some people heard it, some people didn't. Nobody was prompted at what they were going to hear, because that's what I find weird sometimes. Zach Bagans or some of these other guys that I'll watch, but sometimes still kind of scratch my head what's going on. It's like they tell you what's being said, so then you start to hear it. But in this case, we didn't tell anybody what we thought we heard, and it sounded like a girl responding to the question. So I don't know. It was weird. And I've been trying to get, pictures or something, because the one girl that used to run the thing, she'd bring out the dowsing rods, and people, I've always wondered about those things. They always seem to turn for everybody. It just seems, again, like a statistical impossibility that it always works when they're demonstrating it for you. If I did some of these things sometimes and it didn't work, I would sometimes give a little more credibility to some of these tests. But that's that's kind of my ghost thing too. I mean, I'm open to believe, and I have provoked. I actually got the guy leading the thing got real mad at me. We were down in San Clemente in this historic area, and there was a place that supposedly was haunted. Nothing was happening. And I started provoking it. And he got really mad at me saying, "Oh, it won't come back. Stop that." And I'm like, dude, lighten up. But later when we came around to another building, he's staring at the building. Don't you see that? Don't you see that? And everybody's standing there just going, no, no, we don't. Don't you see that movement? And, you stare at something long enough, your eyes are going to start seeing things. I mean, you said you were a cop for a while, right? You probably did stakeouts or, where you're doing something where you're just staring, watching something for a long time. You got to start sometimes. I used to slap myself in the face sometimes, like, wake up. What am I seeing here? When I long hours of a guard gate or something. And I took all my tests to be a sheriff. And I finally thought, why am I chasing this down? Godspeed to all you guys who've done real police work. I think that's a calling. I came home from my physical after I passed all my tests and saw 3 squad cars and their handling a guy over the hood that wasn't really going well. I'm thinking, why am I chasing? I'm chasing money. I wasn't chasing a passion to be a police officer. I thought, I'm getting out of this before. It was fun being security and at times a pain in the butt, but no reason to go down that line. So I wanted to say kudos to you guys who have worn the blue. It's a great thing. I think some do. So.
Yeah, I enjoyed my time, man, but it was time to go. And going back to what you were saying about things, pareidolia, basically, you're creating, your mind is creating things that you don't really see. And that's one of the things that has just really irked me about getting into the Bigfoot research, particularly over the last, 4, 5, 6 years with the internet and just people faking stuff. And
Yeah.
I get this all the time. People send me these photos and it's nothing. It's just trees. It's a clump of mud. And they're like, look, there's a female Sasquatch and there's the male and there's the 2 smaller ones. And I'm like, nope, that's mud. That's just
I'm like the same way. It's like, no, I can tell you what that is. Yeah, I know what you mean. It can be very frustrating, and especially in this age of digital creation where CGI is, I don't want to call it easy because there's artists out there that are very good at this, but the average consumer can do some pretty good stuff with software they can download. So I'm even more skeptical now of visual stuff that I can see. So like those Tic Tac videos where the government's actually saying, we don't know. And you get some credible witnesses, pilots, people that are trained to be on the lookout. That's when you start giving some credibility to some of those. But yeah, most of the stuff I see posted on like Instagram things I follow, I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And I've talked to Doug Hychek about it from Monster Quest. Doug and I have went back and forth about this for so many different times about the pareidolia thing. And he said it on my show when I had him on once, and he was talking about it. He's like, yeah, Brian, I see Sasquatch in my shower at least 6 times a day. And the water droplets,
Yeah.
on my brain. It's something that I'm passionate about. And the more I stare at the tile, the more Sasquatch stare back.
Oh, I know. I was going to tell my wife this morning. I totally forgot. Her and my daughter went off to Disneyland today, but I've got this section of drywall I've been trying to fix and clean, and there's some mess on it. I swear I saw Simpson Jesus in it today. I'm like, God, that looks like Jesus Simpson style. I mean, you see stuff like you say in the water droplets, wherever. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's really weird how your mind can play tricks on you like that. So, like when I did undercover work for security, they had a basic set of rules that you had to stick to. Like the one that nobody stuck to, you had to see somebody enter the store without the item. It's rare when you're working a store that you see the person enter, but at some point you need to see that they don't have it. They always said you got to see them make no attempt to pay. So I, being the smartass I am, I said, so if I see them attempt to pay and their credit card gets rejected, does that still mean it's stolen? Because I thought that line of, see them not pay was kind of dumb, but I understood basically what they meant. And then you had to see him leave the store. Didn't necessarily have to be concealed because not everybody conceals. And then they had to get a certain distance away from the stores because the big excuse at Disneyland was, "Oh, I was just going out to show my wife or my friend. I didn't realize you thought I was stealing," that kind of thing. So we'd want them to get, whatever the distance, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet from the store. So the intent was they were leaving with it. So when you have observational guidelines like that, like anybody should if they're out searching for Sasquatch or UFOs or whatever, you got to almost kind of set up the rules system, I think, to sort of like the UFO experiences of one, two, the different experience levels to kind of cut out the bullshit, right? Although I got to do say I love the end of Harry and the Hendersons, where I had to once I went back frame by frame because I'm thinking, did they do this with trickery and in the film? But if you stop it, all those Sasquatches at the end are all in the frame. But your eye is looking at Harry. And then as these guys turn, one standing right by the tree, blends in, another one's like bent over by a rock. And so you could start to think if these things were smart, they know how to conceal themselves like any animals in the wild do. But I thought that was really kind of fascinating the way they did it at the end of Harry and the Hendersons. And I thought at first it definitely had to be, they weren't in the previous frame, they're cut in, but no, they were standing there the whole time while you're looking at this forest. And so I see how it could happen, I guess is what I'm saying. But
I think it happens a lot. I think people get out in the woods and even people who are looking for Sasquatch miss things, obviously.
mhm.
And if these things really exist, I think people are seeing them. And I don't think I just had a conversation with Peter Byrne the other day, one of the four horsemen. He's the last living four horsemen of the Sasquatchery. He's
I
90
listened to that
years old.
show. Yeah.
And I just talked to him Friday, and he's talking about, he's been looking for this for almost 7 decades. And the only thing he's found is some footprints, basically. They've collected some hair here and there that's come back, really nothing. And even the Yeti skull you were talking about, the Tibetan Yeti skull, he actually got a piece of that back to England for testing, but that's it, and he's been doing this for nearly 70 years, and he's probably going to pass away without having any definitive proof that these things are real and that they exist. And I think that's unfortunately what's going to happen in a lot of cases with pretty much everything. I think the UFO thing is pretty much out there. I think people are, probably 5 out of 10 people, if you ask them honestly, they're going to tell you they believe that UFOs are unidentified flying objects flown by alien, it's alien technology flown by alien entities. That may be all they know, but I think most people truly believe that we're being visited or these things are coming and going from somewhere and they're not from this world. But when it comes to Sasquatch and other cryptids and things like that, I think it's still probably, maybe 2 or 3 out of 10 people that actually believe that something might exist. But it comes with the lack of scientific proof and the lack of evidence that we continue to deal with Sasquatch. And that's one of the things I asked Peter before we wrapped up his interview the other day was, why is it that we don't have definitive proof? And he's like, well, I think the population has dwindled. I think there's very few of them left. I think they're only in certain areas, pretty much isolated to the Pacific Northwest. And that's one of the things I asked him about. I said, I do an encounter show, and I'm talking to people from everywhere that are seeing these things all over the place. I believe I've had some kind of interaction with these things vocally here on my property in North Carolina. But Peter Byrne basically told me I'm full of shit because they don't exist here in North Carolina.
Well, it's funny you say that because the guy at the Santa Clara Bigfoot Center that I was talking about, he was kind of under the impression that there weren't really any down in this area where he's at, which is a little south of what I guess what we would really call the Pacific Northwest, because it's see with Santa, that'd be south of. We're still in an area where there's some redwoods, but we're south of San Francisco. But he's got a map on the wall where he just allowed anybody that comes in that thinks they've seen a Sasquatch can put a pin, and he said he was actually very surprised at how many sightings they're still getting down there. And you would think, yeah, maybe it's overpopulated. But there's still a lot of area not inhabited by people. And you got to maybe think about, like, what is it, the Sela camp that was thought to be extinct for millions of years, if not just thousands of years. And not that long ago, they found one. So I think if science would say, well, maybe possibly it existed, but it's extinct now, there's always the possibility, because I keep hearing, don't want to say every day, but I hear enough of the rediscovery of a species thought to be extinct in an isolated area. So I think it could happen. But I think my biggest thing is why people are afraid to be labeled as a kook, because either through the press or modern science, who seem not to give any credit to a lot of these things, the cryptids, UFOs seem to be coming around and getting a little more, you know, weight behind it when the government's kind of coming out and these pilots. But the cryptids and the ghost thing, I think still people quietly will say yes, but I mean, it kind of, they're just beaten down with the it's all a hoax. It's all, it's for fun, whatever they want to say, because science has kind of closed their minds. At least scientists who don't, maybe they're afraid of losing their funding or being ridiculed in their community. A friend of mine and I were just talking about this the other day, how, scientists rely on funding, and they know where their funding is usually coming from. I don't know if there's a lot of blind, donation funding out there to just help a particular guy out. And you kind of sometimes wonder if they're just trying to give the right answers for the guy that's giving them funding, so more funding comes along. It's cynical, but you kind of wonder why they're just so dead set against it and don't even have the open mind of science to maybe give it some credibility. I don't get it. I went to a lecture on cryptids. I didn't know what I was really going to. My wife's like, oh, we're going to the Santa Ana Zoo. They've got this thing. I think it's like on Bigfoots and stuff. It was all the range of cryptids. And they brought up Skinwalker Ranch, which I had known about long before the show was on TV. And which was kind of interesting. So, there's so much, I don't know, just fascination out there with these things that, it holds my interest, because there's no definitive answer either way. So it leaves it open. And I think we're really arrogant if we think, let's just say I'll buy into evolution as, a fact. It's still considered a theory, but let's buy into it as a fact. We would be pretty arrogant to think we're the only place this has ever happened. The universe is so vast and big, it's got to happen somewhere else. And whether that happened long before us, and they've got the technology now to move beyond, what we can do and visit here. How is that so far-fetched to believe, if we believe somehow we, over time oozed out of this primordial soup into, to the sea and to eventually where we are now? Why can't you believe there's somebody else out there? I saw this documentary with Ben Stein once, which I found very interesting. You know Ben Stein, right? Yes. I think he was in the yes, and he had the show for a while, When Ben Stein's Money. He's a highly intelligent individual. I didn't know that. One day I found out he had worked, I think, in the Reagan White House. I'm not sure if he's a speechwriter or what he was, but a highly intelligent guy. And he did this little documentary where he went around asking scientists about what now a lot of creationists are using the term intelligent design. And they're not saying that it's, the Judeo-Christian God, but somewhere out there, someone's helping us out. There's some purpose to all this. And he would ask a scientist about it. And most of them would say, they'd poo-poo the idea of any intelligent design. It's all this random accident. And then he would ask them, and I'm simplifying it, of course, he'd ask them about, well, could aliens have seeded the planet? If I remember right, like 99.9% of them said absolutely aliens could have seeded this planet. but they would absolutely say they don't believe there could be any divine intervention. And I just found that odd. I mean, aliens aren't even an accepted thing, but they would believe something like that, but they couldn't believe anything bigger and more powerful than us. So, and this is my dichotomy, my struggle sometimes based on what I was brought up on, versus sometimes science totally disagrees with that. Sometimes it doesn't really have an answer. So I'm left in the middle, just trying to, figure it out for myself, if you will. And that's why I find it so interesting. I think it's like, I'd like to see some answers, I'd like to know more about, Easter Island and the Rapa Nui, and, how they got all those, Moai, or I think I pronounced that wrong, but all the statues in place. I'd like to know really how the pyramids were built. It's just, there's so many fascinating big things that happened in our past where we can't hardly do any of it today. But you got to wonder just what was going on this planet in general, which then leaves me wide open to a lot of this stuff is believable, and that's kind of what, is further into my fascination and all this stuff.
I'm the same way, man. And that's why I show up week after week and I do the shows and talk to the people like you who come on and have, I mean, we've kind of had like an hour plus creepy pasta kind of conversation,
Yeah, it's all over
which
the
I
place.
love, right? Because I get so in the lane of Bigfoot, and I do the Bigfoot encounter shows, and that's what people show up for. And I get shit on the show every single week because I do a bonus show every Sunday on the Sasquatch Odyssey, and it's all about paranormal stuff, and it's usually alien related. And I get these people leaving reviews, and they're like, "Oh, it's supposed to be a Bigfoot show." Well, you know what, dude? It's my show, and I
Yeah.
own all this, so I'm going to put out whatever I want.
Yeah.
I have the Paranormal Odyssey is specifically for these kind of conversations, but there are plenty of people who do have open minds, and they're not just one track on the Bigfoot thing. And that's what's always fascinated me is you have a conversation with people about Bigfoot, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Bigfoot absolutely exists. I've seen it. Clyde the Bigfoot comes over for dinner every
Yeah.
Sunday." But you say something about an alien or a UFO, and they're like, "That's hogwash. There's no way that can exist." Come on,
Yeah.
dude. Really? Just open your mind and be willing to at least explore it, right? That's at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about, is being open minded and just saying, "Hey, what if?"
Yeah. And at the very least, I equate it back to the ghost stories I do at all these different cities we go to. Even if the ghost part's not right, I'm learning something about their city, their town, the lore, the history. It's fun. I think it builds you as an individual to be, far more rounded than just staying in your little bubble. Test yourself now and then, go outside of the bubble a little bit and experience it. And I tell you, we did something up in Yosemite that kind of scared the crap out of me. I was going up there for all things CAD training for my architecture. This guy had this concept of high tech, high nature. So we would like cram and study all day and learn all these new techniques. Then we'd go enjoy nature. Well, one night, and there had been some reports of some, I believe, mountain lions in the area. And we're out laying in the middle of a giant field because he wanted to watch the stars and watch the satellites go over because it's very dark up there. So you get a great sky. And all I can think of is what predator is out there watching a bunch of dumb humans laying in a field. I mean, there's bear up there. You name it. Yosemite's got it all. And I thought, because I'm not my dad, we had a cabin in the local mountains, but when my dad died, all the like outdoor experience and learning, he was a hunter, he'd been in the Navy. I lost all that. So no more, we never did that kind of experience. So I'm not always real comfortable being out where I don't know my surroundings and I'm unarmed. I wouldn't go out in the nature unarmed, but we couldn't do it in the national park at that time. So yeah, I thought it was scary and enjoying at the same time, but your mind starts to wander, you hear all these things. And I'm thinking, I'm not okay. In the very least, I'm not the slowest person here. So all of the funny things, it's like if they're not the slowest, you're probably not going to be taken down. I don't know, but but it was fun. I like to open myself up for experiences. I'd love to go out with someone like you who knows their land. And I watch those guys, the squatching guys, and it's really squatchy out here. I can't remember the name of their show. It just kind of came back on, I think, recently. Bobo and the other guys.
Yeah,
And
Finding Bigfoot.
I was like, yeah, fine. I've watched so many, I've lost track of the names, and I don't know them using those terms all the time, like it's squatchy out here. I start to feel like the credibility sometimes is a little lost, and I don't know. I thought something was wrong with. I didn't recognize Bobo at first on this new show I saw. I was like, God, he lost some weight or he didn't look well. Um, the guy up at the Bigfoot museum we visited said he had been poisoned, and they thought somebody was after him or something. So I don't know. It's there's this whole underworld too. Of these communities. There's a show out there now where they're hunting Bigfoot. They're looking to kill one. I this is the hard thing for me. When you want to prove the science, you've got one. Are you trapping it, or I don't think killing it's the right thing, but I know some people think that's the only answer, and they're out there hunting it, trying to kill it. And I'm like, it's not for subsistence. I'm all for hunting when you're you're living on it, not for sport. But and I recently did one of our travel shows. We ended up at a place, and I didn't really know what it was. It was a place where on display was this guy's collection of basically sport kill. And it's a huge collection. And there's a whole, I didn't realize there's a whole I don't want to call it an underworld, but awards, all kinds of things for big game kill. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I don't know if that's where all the natural history museums get all their displays, but it was kind of sad to think about it a little bit, because I was always brought up as you don't harass the animals. You're only going to kill them if you need substance. You're going to eat them. But that was great. That's fine. But you're not doing it for sport. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I believe, and I've said it many times on the show, I think somebody's got to take one of these things down. And Peter Byrne, for example, I talked to him on Friday, as I said, that's one of the things he's always been anti-kill. And he's like, Grover Krantz used to be like, shoot one of these jokers and bring it in so we can figure out what it is. And Peter Byrne's like, no, I don't think we should do that. And I'm kind of in between, because I want it to be proven.
Yes.
But I'm not going to be the Yahoo that's out there with a weapon running around in the woods trying to find one, because I don't know how that may not go well.
No, but there is the opposite, which I never hear anybody talk about, but is to take them down with a dart. If we can take down lions and rhinos to tag them, I'm sure we could take a Bigfoot down to either tag it or bring it in. The unknown thing is, how strong are these things really, if they exist? If I always I sometimes go back to that movie, Hearing the Hendersons. You've run one over, you're going to take him in, but you just stunned him. How strong is he? Can you really tie him down? Can you hold on to him, if you will? It would be interesting to find out. I guess I wouldn't want to be the guy necessarily to find that out, but yeah, I think one needs to be, unfortunately, in a zoo or in a scientific lab for science to finally believe it, because I don't think without that they're going to. And it's funny, I was watching some guy who was he was like, well, I never see bears dead in the woods. And the science guy, I think it's the guy you may have mentioned, I forgot all the names, but he's a scientist. He's been studying it. He's got a lot of the castings, and he's like, well, I have seen a bear, come across a bear skeleton. I mean, over time, nature's going to take care of it, right? But it's that sweet spot of catching it before all the different predators who will chew on it, eat it, whatever, bugs eat it away. So the idea that because we never find, the average person doesn't find a bear skeleton, doesn't mean that Bigfoot's not out there either, because you don't find skeletons. As the guy kept saying in the Bigfoot Museum up north here, absence of evidence is not evidence. And I totally agree, because science, the world will say there's no evidence. Well, absent of the evidence is no proof either.
Absolutely, man. I agree. We've mentioned it several times over the last hour plus of us talking. Tell everybody about your travel show and where we can find it. Do a shameless plug of your show.
Yeah, I keep dropping little hints, huh? It's called The American Landscape. It is available on YouTube. If you search it, you'll probably also get a band which I didn't know was out there, called The American Landscape. But we're a travel show that are slowly expanding across the country. We're based here in Southern California. We try to go to the weird roadside attractions, the quirky places, but we've also been to larger, well-known places like the Reagan Museum out here. We've been to a dinosaur discovery site in Utah. We've been to the Bigfoot Museum, as I mentioned. We used to do 3 little short visits to 3 different places in one episode, and that's the Bigfoot is caught up in a show called Mysteries Bigfoot and Missions, where we went to the mystery spot, which is one of those places where water runs uphill, the house is set at a weird angle, and everything feels weird and odd. Now we do a full episode to each location. We've been to this like dwarf car museum out in the middle of the desert in Arizona that Jay Leno's been to, other people. And what I find fascinating, what's really interesting to me is the people we meet, more so sometimes in the locations, because they're just like salt of the earth people that are very passionate about whatever they're doing, whether it's the old Presidio in Tucson where the Spanish first settled, or the Bigfoot Museum or the Reagan Museum. The individuals there are really passionate about their subject. And it's kind of a thing about the people as much as it is about the location. So it's like a quintessential road trip. You're in the back of your kind of station wagon with your parents going to all these places. And that's the kind of way we bill it. I try not to do any research. So when I see it, if it's the first time I've been there, there's a few places I've been before, and I'll tell the people sometimes, I've been here before, but I want to see it like fresh eyes. Kind of like when we talked about before we started to record, it's like, whoa, stop. I just want to hear that fresh. I totally get it, because that's kind of what the show's about. And I've struggled a little bit with camera work. My camera guy and I argue a lot about, his camera work, but I get what I pay for. It's totally self-funded right now. And Amazon, well, I probably shouldn't say. I've had some feelers out to different places, so other people have looked at it. I don't know, maybe YouTube is the place that ends up and stays, but we're also reaching out to other people I know to maybe get a wider distribution and a budget where we can, upgrade some of our shortcomings. But that's kind of what it is.
Awesome, and I'll definitely link to it in the show notes for everybody
Oh,
to check
awesome.
it out, man. So, The American Landscape, Greg Nutt, man, it's been awesome. I'll have to have you back. We'll have to do like a creepy pasta every month and have you back for a show.
Oh, that'd be cool. Your podcast sat in my queue for a long time on Spotify, and I'm kind of getting back into the gym and walking. So for like the last 3-4 months, I've been just cranking through episodes. And because I kind of thought, how can you do a weekly thing on Bigfoot? How many stories are out there? And then I keep getting these odd paranormal, like you call the ones you want to do anyways, about all the other side stories that are out there. So it's nice. It's been interesting. Your guests are interesting, and that's what keeps me coming back to your show.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it very much.
No problem.
Oh, that was
So,
great, man.
I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to do it again. As you're talking, I'm like, damn, we could probably do a 2-hour show and we could pick one topic a month as long as your schedule allowed, and just have you back, because I think people will really enjoy the conversation. And I don't get to
Yeah,
have intelligent conversations a lot with people. It's usually just about, oh, I've got this story and that's it, and then it's done. And I'm trying to pull the talking out of them and ask a bunch of questions. And
yeah. I've been told you know, talk too much sometimes. My cigar group sometimes there's like, we had nothing to talk about. You didn't show up. Like, I used to be a very shy kid. Now, I married into an Italian family where if you didn't speak up, you never got heard. So